I think we've had enough of you all work your way back. I'm going to officially say welcome back, and hopefully we'll have more folks here very shortly. The next session has real special significance to me because it's about government affairs. We have two speakers that will present during this session. I think we're going to have a lively discussion following. I am pleased to introduce John Cooper, Governmental Affairs Consultant with Capital Link, KBA's lobbyist. I don't know if any of you all have seen The Music Man. That's a very old musical, but it's a classic. And there's an opening scene where all the salesmen are riding along in a train car. And every now and then one of them pops up and says, "But you gotta know the territory." John Cooper knows the territory better than anybody I know. We also have Daniel Robb, President and CEO of Jonesboro State Bank in Jonesboro, Missouri, and the 2022-23 President and elected Chair of the American Bankers Association. And although it's not my script, we also are lucky enough to have his lovely wife Diana with us, that I think some of you all have had a chance to meet at our various receptions. Welcome, gentlemen. John Cooper, the floor is yours, sir.
Am I on? Can you hear me? Great. First thing I want to say is that obviously at the beginning of our morning session, Ballard did a wonderful, moving tribute to Deborah Stamper, one of which I'm not sure I could have gotten through. Somebody has my notes. Thank you. But, you know, I'm not sure I could have gotten through that. 27 years, 4 phone calls on average per week. That's how often I talk to Deborah. I have 3 natural sisters, and Deborah is my 4th sister. And true to Janine's comments this morning, I'm gonna do this with a smile on my face because Deborah's on my shoulder. I believe in connectedness, and I know what she's telling me, but I'm not gonna tell you guys. I think that was a really fitting tribute, Ballard. We're all thinking that these days. So it's 42 days till the general election in Kentucky. That election, we elect statewide office holders, and it's highlighted by the governor's race. I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Turn your television sets off for the next 42 days, because you know, you won't learn anything that will teach you more about the candidates, really, or what's going on with the election. And you'll be in a whole lot better mood. I'll guarantee you that. So our 2024 session of the Kentucky General Assembly begins on January the 2nd, because it's always the first Monday after the first Tuesday. So it begins January 2nd, 2024. And it's our budget session, which means it's 60 legislative days between January the 2nd and when it has to adjourn constitutionally on April the 15th. We do a 2-year budget, as you know, in Kentucky. That budget that we will pass early this year will go into effect July 1 of 2024 and run through the next 2 years. You know, a session, and one of the reasons I brought up the governor's race is every session has a personality or a tenor. And this one will be set depending upon who the governor is. They won't have control of it. Governors have less control over sessions than they've ever had, and that's been for over a decade. But if our current governor, Andy Beshear, is reelected, his staff's still already in place. Budget submissions have to be in starting the 1st of October, and not much really changes in terms of the flow. If a new governor, if Daniel Cameron's elected governor, he would be inaugurated in the first 10 days of December. You got to hire staff, you got to put everything together. Your budget submissions are already in process because the last governor did it, and you have to submit your budget in January to the General Assembly. So it's a very different dynamic depending upon, obviously, who is there. The predominant thing that will dominate the 2-year session that begins in January is our biennial budget, as I mentioned before. You know, the state has strong reserves right now as we go into this next budget cycle. We have a good employment demand, and we have a good employment demand for two reasons. One, we have a lot of economic activity going on in Kentucky, particularly in the automotive and energy-related sector. We also have a very low unemployment participation rate, second worst in the country. So we have a lot of people out there that still need to be employed. And one of the things that the General Assembly and the governor, current governor, agree on is something has to be done about that. We have a number of economic development projects that have been moving along, so there is good employment demand. We also have strong reserves, and one of the reasons we have strong reserves is because Kentucky was one of the early states in adding sales tax to the internet marketplace. That means you buy something from Amazon, Etsy, whatever, you obviously pay sales tax on that. One of the reasons, and those online sellers, they wanted that internet marketplace sales tax where it could be collected by them. And the reason they wanted it because if the state didn't mandate that, there are people in other countries, namely China, that wouldn't pay it. And so they knew that they had to have a mandate in order to have that. And that has given us a strong sales tax base. We have some of the strongest reserve we've had in a long period of time, but revenues are starting to slow. And in 2000, about 4 years ago, the General Assembly started to look at reducing Kentucky's income tax rate, which was then 6%. The personal income tax rate was 6%. It has been lowered to 4.5%, and the triggers were met in January 1 of 2024 to lower that rate to 4%. But they did not meet the triggers. They already know that they have not met the triggers for the 2025 tax year. In fact, they're way off. So the reduction of the personal employment or personal income tax will stay at 4%, at least for the foreseeable future, unless the General Assembly makes another change. The issues, so every time we have a budget session, the predominant issue is funding of education. And we just came through a period of time where we had all of the COVID money and all of the other things that were infused into our economy, a lot of which went into school systems. But that's going away at the end of 24. So they will be looking at what to do in funding education. The other piece that they're going to be looking at in this biennial session that focuses on the budget is modernizing how state government operates, how it impacts you and how you interface with it. In addition to that, with EVs, with hybrids, EVs, plug-in hybrids online today, we have to change the way we fund roads because we're going away from strictly a motor fuels tax. And there are other fuels, such as hydrogen, that are on the horizon. One of the things that will be, and there was a bill that was passed, but it had a delayed start date that would have implemented a fee on hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and BEVs or battery electric vehicles. And in addition, what we know to come to be hydrogen in the future. That will be finalized, and an actual tax will start to move on in 24, one way or the other. But that's something that is yet to be decided. So what's KBA? What are we going to be working on? Well, we're working on, and we have been for months, a comprehensive modernization of Kentucky's banking laws and regulations. We've not done that in a long period of time. And it's quite an undertaking. It will take a while. We are going to be presenting in November before the Banking and Insurance Committee probably the first draft, which the staff at LRC have worked with our staff at KBA. Both Deborah, God rest her soul, and Tim have worked hard on that. Tim and I met with the LRC staff in the last few weeks, and we're continuing to run drafts back and forth. We have the credit unions are involved and securities industry involved, but this is primarily this is going to evolve around banking. And then in the 22 session, we funded over $20 million to modernize county clerk's offices with regard to motor vehicles, registrations and licensing, titling, and those kind of things, which would allow you to, at your desk or the dealer at their dealership, to do everything electronically. That process is moving along pretty well. We also funded over $20 million in the land title area to be able to do land title work, stuff in the document rooms at your county court clerks, to get those scanned, to get those online, to get those searchable, to get those to be searchable over county lines. That's not gone so smoothly. We have still a number of county clerks that don't have even appropriate scanning devices to do that. So there was an RFP that just went out to help to move that process. That's been pushed back a year. We're probably going to have to tweak that bill during the General Assembly in 2024. We're nervous about it, but we're optimistic we can make enough changes to get those to work. But it has been a real challenge because there are 6 different systems that county clerks use today in their offices across the state, and none of them can talk to each other. So we have a lot of integration problems to work on. So, you know, the other issue is privacy, and some of these are from a defensive standpoint as well. There's a model privacy bill that's passed in a few states. It's picked up speed in 23. Virginia was one of the first states that started in it, and it's okay. It's something that I think everybody can live with. There are some other privacy bills, and one that's been introduced in Kentucky 3 times that allows a private cause of action for violation of the law. That's not good. And the one thing I want to make sure you understand, financial institutions, banks by definition, are excluded from this privacy law, but not your non-banking subs. And so that's one of the things we'll be working on. Digital currency. We've had what I call a journey in Kentucky, Ballard could tell you, in digital currency. It's kind of been with the legislature a learn-as-you-go process, mostly learn. And we've had some bills that have come up, and we really, quite frankly, would prefer, we don't want to pass a bill just on the state level on digital currency. This has to be a national standard. We expect bills again this time. We have UCC updates that we work on all the time with John McGarvey. We will have UCC updates that will involve digital transactions, and they face some issues basically of misinformation and of just a general lack of understanding. Then there's AI, and God forbid any state legislature trying to tackle AI legislation. Okay, one of our objectives, and one of the automobile OEM manufacturers of everybody around, just about every business, hospitals, wants to make sure we don't have any kind of statewide regulation on AI. That would be a nightmare and a disaster in itself. And then the other thing that we work on specifically with banks is to make sure we don't have an overreaction on ESG issues. We have worked and we've worked with the coal industry and others throughout the last 2 years to try to weave our way through this issue. So far, I think we've done pretty well, but we always have some bills that'll come up that we'll usually have to deal with. Some of them that are well-meaning, but usually overreaching. I do expect legislation to be introduced in both houses in reaction to the Old National shooting. We haven't seen the final draft of that legislation yet, but we will very soon. And we will keep you apprised when that legislation is introduced as to what it is. So it's a busy time. We will be very busy. You will be busy because we're going to make sure that you're busy, because we need a lot of help. And we can only be as effective as you make us. I mean that. I've been doing this for 40 years. And I know, that's one thing I know what I'm talking about. Without you, we're just the traffic cops, okay? You are the strength, and I want to make sure that you show that. And with that, are we going to answer questions together or separately? All right, very good. Thanks, man. All right.
Well, good morning, Kentucky bankers. What a joy it is to be with you. Thank you, John, for sharing that outlook from Frankfurt. It's very, very exciting to be with you all here today. On behalf of the American Bankers Association, to share a bit from a national perspective. Before I start, let me as well share on behalf of ABA our condolences on the loss of Deborah. God be with all of you and to comfort you. One of my greatest delights as ABA chair is getting to crisscross our beautiful country, literally from sea to shining sea. In the past 6 months, I've been from my home in Missouri to all corners of the nation: Hawaii, Connecticut, Florida, Arizona, Michigan, and now here with you in beautiful Colorado Springs with bankers from the beautiful Commonwealth of Kentucky. I absolutely love a certain brown beverage that you all have been enjoying, and I participated in your drawing. Congratulations to those that won. I wish I would have been able to take home some of that fine Kentucky rare bourbon as well. And my great-great-great-grandfather was born in Jessamine County in 1799. Later married, moved to Missouri, settled in Missouri, but who knows? Some of us could be kin. Let me start with the CFPB lawsuits and our good friend Rohit Chopra. I'd like to start by giving you a brief update on ABA's efforts to rein in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. At ABA, we are firmly pushing back strongly against regulatory changes that will do more harm than good. We have done that in 2 recent cases through lawsuits filed against the agency. It's never our first choice or your first choice to sue a regulatory agency. But in these particular cases, this was the only response that matched the excessive and aggressive actions of the CFPB. And we exhausted all other means of trying to reason with the CFPB. As I'm sure many of you are following in ABA News Bites, which I just looked at this morning with a cup of coffee, hopefully several of you start your morning that way as well, ABA and other business groups have scored 2 significant victories in 2 lawsuits against the Bureau. Just this month, a judge in Texas issued a final ruling that the Bureau did not have the authority to make key changes to its exam manual that would allow it to extend the agency's UDAP authority to cover discrimination, well beyond the authority Congress gave to it. That's a big deal. And even for a little bank such as mine, it all trickles down. It's a big deal for you. We're pushing back against those regulators, and we're saying, we're not going to stand for this. You are overreaching, and we are going to push back. The judge's ruling completely set aside the exam manual update, and to make extra sure that members of ABA, the Texas Bankers Association, and the other associations that brought the lawsuit are not subject to efforts by the Bureau to pursue its UDAP theory by other means. The judge issued an injunction providing additional protection for our members. As Representative Barr said earlier, it's a big deal. It really is a big deal. The second ruling is in the lawsuit brought by Texas Bankers Association, Rio Bank, and the ABA, a lawsuit challenging the CFPB's final rule on Section 1071, the Small Business Loan Data Collection Rule. The rule went far beyond the requirements in the statute, and we believe that it will ultimately harm the small businesses we seek to serve. Representative Barr basically gave my speech. It was fantastic, everything that he talked about this morning. And I am blessed to also have Representative Blaine Luetkemeyer as my representative. So between Luetkemeyer and Barr, we have a couple really, really strong champions for our industry. This case is currently on hold while the Supreme Court hears a separate challenge to the constitutionality of the whole agency. But the costly efforts to comply with the final rule would have to continue. We did not want bankers to be forced to spend huge sums of money and time to comply with a rule that might be overturned. So we asked the judge for a nationwide injunction that would pause compliance. In late July, the judge granted the injunction providing a compliance pause. However, the relief was provided only to ABA and TBA members. And let me make it very clear, I sat in on every one of those meetings, and I was very proud as a rural, small town community bank that we voted to start the lawsuit, and we wanted it for everyone, not just for TBA members and not just for ABA members. That was very, very clear in our petition to the court and even after that. Recognizing that the whole industry benefits from the regulatory clarity, we have asked the judge to expand the injunction to cover all banks, and we have asked the CFPB director to use his discretion to do the same. But, thanks to the Kentucky bankers, most recently filed its own lawsuit requesting relief for banks in the Bluegrass State, and the judge issued an injunction in that case. I want to thank KBA leadership, as well as Texas bankers leadership, for their hard work, vision, and investment in this case. ABA and our state bankers associations partners are making clear to the CFPB that we will not stand idly by while the Bureau exceeds its authority. And I can tell you from my many visits to Washington, D.C., Blaine Luchtenmeyer said that several times. Why aren't you suing the CFPB? You need to push back. And we did. And it's fantastic, the results that we're seeing. Our success in the UDAP manual case in particular will be a clarion call to all regulatory agencies. Be careful to stick to your congressional authority. These lawsuits send a message. ABA and all of us as bankers will not sit idly by when we see such blatant overreach by any agency. CFPB wasn't even supposed to have any effect on a small bank like mine, as I said earlier, or yours. But I can tell you, it has. So I'm especially grateful that ABA has the back of us as bankers. We seek to rein in this rogue regulator. Before I move on to a few policy topics, I'd like to tell you a little more about my bank. I've had the great privilege of working in banking for more than 38 years. At Jonesburg State Bank, we have 25 dedicated staff and about $130 million in assets. We have just 3 branches, but like each of you, we have a mighty impact in those communities that we serve. When it comes to financing our consumers, farmers, and small business clients in our local areas, I believe that Jonesburg State Bank can run circles around the biggest of banks. But there's an essential place for banks of all sizes in our great nation to operate and serve customers for so many different reasons. Like many other small banks, Jonesburg State Bank isn't suited to bank or finance companies like Apple, Starbucks, Verizon, Ford. Our big global banks can and do serve our largest American companies. Every single one of us in this room has a place in the banking world, and I am proud to be a rural community banker by choice. One thing that's very special to me about ABA, something I'm so proud of, is that every bank has a seat at the table. And as I said earlier, I got to cast a vote on behalf of you, on behalf of us, to sue the CFPB. And my voice was heard, and I was so proud of that. Our voice counts just as much with ABA as does the voice of our chair-elect Julie Thurlow, who leads an $870 million bank in Massachusetts, and our vice chair John Asbury, who leads a $20 billion bank in Virginia. That's something I've been really impressed by throughout my service with ABA. And speaking of ABA service, did you know that nationwide we have 15,000 banker volunteers, 200 different committees, councils, and working groups? Volunteers power everything ABA does, and our partnerships help us build better banking policy, from Washington to Frankfurt. I want to give a special thanks to everyone from Kentucky who serves in leadership with ABA. Lytle Thomas, Tim Barnes, Jessica Watts, my good friend Luther Deaton, who's also from Jessamine County. We may be kin, Luther and I. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, all of you that are helping lead us, your skills, your expertise. We are all better because of your service. Before I move on to highlight a few of the specific policy issues where the ABA is most active, I want to emphasize your role in helping deliver wins for the industry. It should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway, your own voice is critically important for policymakers to hear. It was just said on the state level, and it's the very same on the national level. Get to know your senators and representatives, and it's very clear you all have a very great relationship with Representative Barr. Be a resource. Be their expert. Offer your cell phone number, and be sure to invite that lawmaker to visit with you in your bank. Nothing drives home the value that you provide to your community than seeing your bank operations and customers in person. Don't miss the opportunity to build these relationships at your bank. Your voice matters, and ABA cannot be as effective as we want to be without you stepping up as advocates with your fresh energy and ideas. With that, let me highlight two issues where ABA is focusing attention, and we've spoke about that earlier as well. ACRE. We are seeing remarkable action on a long-standing priority, the Access to Credit for Our Rural Economy Act, or ACRE for short. What ACRE does is exclude from gross income the interest received by a qualified lender on all loans secured by farm real estate and aquaculture facilities. It also excludes the interest received by a qualified lender on home mortgage loans that do not exceed $750,000 in rural communities of no more than 2,500 people. This bill is a bipartisan solution to the real estate challenges faced by communities like mine. It will help us sustain and grow rural America by making it easier for farmers, ranchers, and rural families to access low-cost credit. We estimate that ACRE will save farmers and ranchers $1.15 billion per year, putting money back into our rural economies and helping banks compete with the tax-advantaged farm credit system. You may remember similar bills from our prior Congress as ECORA. We're already seeing more support for ACRE than ever before, with a total of 21 bipartisan co-sponsors in the House, 10 Democrats and 11 Republicans, as well as bipartisan introduction in the Senate. Visit secureamericanopportunity.com to encourage your lawmakers to co-sponsor the ACRE Act. We visited a lot about Interchange Durbin. While we hope to play offense on ACRE, ABA is also playing defense. One area where we are focusing in on is preventing the imposition of additional price caps and limits on credit and debit card interchange. Last year, we successfully fought efforts by Senators Roger Marshall and Dick Durbin to extend certain Durbin Amendment restrictions that applied to debit cards now on to credit cards. We were able to remind lawmakers that the Durbin Amendment resulted in a significant loss in revenue that banks use to provide low-cost accounts to our customers, fight fraud, and maintain our efficient U.S. payment system. Just as the Durbin Amendment spelled an end to the consumer-friendly free checking for many banks nationwide, extending it to the credit cards would pinch the popular card rewards programs that consumers love. Consumers of all income brackets use rewards to help defray expenses in these inflationary times. Applying Durbin rules to credit cards would once again line retailers' pockets disproportionately, the largest retailers, nationwide grocery store conglomerates, and big box chains at the expense of the consumers. Unfortunately, Senators Durbin and Marshall have not listened to reason. This year, they and a few House members reintroduced their Durbin 2.0 bill, but ABA was ready. On the eve of the Durbin-Marshall press conference, ABA and the 51 state bankers associations sent a letter to Capitol Hill that made clear that supporting this bill is tantamount to giving a payday to big retail and grocery interests at the expense of everyday shoppers, small businesses, and the community financial institutions like mine. This time of year is critical. Senators Durbin and Marshall have offered an amendment to a must-pass spending bill. They just held a press conference last week touting that rewards were for rich people and that it only affected Wall Street banks, not community banks. Ironically, Kansas bankers were in D.C. for their fall visit, and 50 Kansas community bankers attended that press conference and stared Marshall in the eye. They were able to rebut comments to the press that was there while being interviewed by Bloomberg. We all must remain vigilant as bankers and push back hard. Please help us, your state association, to deliver this message by taking, again, action on secureamericanopportunity.com. In closing, something I'd like to share that's very dear to my heart as a banker. Our customers are our most valuable asset. All the money in our vaults, all the loans on our books, they will never be more important than those customers that we serve. When we see them having trouble getting credit because of regulation that's been put into place, we fight for them. When we see the opportunities to serve them with creative and innovative products, we deliver those to them. And when we see customers open their first bank account and come into the financial Main Street, we celebrate with them. And if we always can remember that our customers are our most very valuable asset, the future of our industry will remain bright. Diana, who was pointed out, my best friend, my wife, my partner in crime, and I, as always, continue to enjoy your friendships, your encouragement, and our great associations. Thanks for letting me share some ABA news, and please truly know that I will voice your concerns every opportunity that I can. This actually is my last official state convention address as the chairman, but I'm not stopping. I am going to continue. My voice is for you as bankers. My voice is for bankers that I've met all across this great nation, and I will continue to fight for all of you. I'm looking forward to joining further conversations in just a moment, but afterward, please follow up with me on any of these topics you'd like to discuss, or just say, hey, cousin. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for your support of the ABA. God bless you, and God bless the communities that you serve.
Dan, hearing you talk about CFPB, UDAP expanding into the area of discrimination, Equal Credit Opportunity Act, Reg B, Occupy the Field on Discrimination. They're policed by the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, the Office of the Comptroller. How does CFPB even attempt to justify to take UDAP and say, oh, we're over there too?
Unfortunately, you go with Senator Warren, the lady from
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
How can I forget that name? Or Bernie Sanders, or all of those that are pushing from behind the scenes, and especially Rohit Chopra is their little puppet that they are controlling and pulling the strings, and it's flowing over to all the other agencies.
Yeah.
We literally just got done with our FDIC compliance exam. Their focus was not on, are we following the compliance rules? It was, what are you doing to consumer harm? How are you harming the consumer? We're not harming the consumer. And we went back and forth on several different things. I guarantee you that is a spillover from what CFPB is doing that's going into FDIC that is spilling over into all of that. I don't have the answer as to why that is, other than what's behind the scenes and them pulling those strings.
Well, it's probably a direct or indirect influence. That, well, if CFPB is going to get involved in this, we better do it or we're going to lose some of our territory.
Absolutely. They don't want to get kicked out of their sandbox. They want to play in it, and they want to play a very long time, and they want to make the rules.
Well, that UDAP ruling is critical, and we're all going to be watching. As Andy Barr said, he's going to be at the Supreme Court arguments on October 3rd regarding funding, but as anybody that's a lawyer here knows, they may hear arguments on November 3rd. It may be next June before we see a decision in that case.
Absolutely.
John, coming back to Kentucky, we've had a super majority Republican legislature for years. We've had a Democratic governor. How's that working out for the state?
Well, what we should demand as the voters is that regardless of your party, we've got issues to solve and they need to be solved. But it won't happen until these folks here stand up and say, that's what we demand.
we respect the offices, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But nothing frustrates me more than someone apologizing for being someone's constituent, okay? One of the things the governor, if this governor is reelected, obviously his relationship with the legislature, he'll have to work much harder on it because, you know, you become a lame duck the day after you're reelected if you're reelected for a second term.
Right.
So you need them to pass those two budgets that he would have to pass during that time. If you're Daniel Cameron, you've got to make sure that just because you're the same party doesn't mean things are always going to go smooth. In fact, the previous Republican governor had a horrible relationship with the General Assembly. But I really believe that them working together depends on you. And I say that since I've been watching this for a long time, and as I said, they work for you. And remember that. And a lady, I gave a speech recently in Lexington, and a lady said, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I said, it starts with you, right here.
Yeah.
I'm looking you in the eye. But I do believe that regardless, I think the General Assembly has started to get the message that they've got to work together better. I do believe that. We'll see what the atmosphere
Kentucky was quite a progressive state at one time. And I don't mean progressive from a political left-right standpoint. I mean, education. I was once, I guess it was probably in the late 90s, I was in your home state and had the chancellor of the University of Missouri main campus want to talk to me about what we were doing for higher ed in Kentucky. Paul Patton said 3 biggest issues were education, education, and education, because it takes care of criminal justice issues, it takes care of economic development when you've got trained workers, it even takes care of long-term health care. What's happened there?
Well, I can tell you that we're at a critical phase in funding public education in Kentucky right now. But bankers have been some of the biggest supporters of public education in Kentucky, particularly our local school districts. There's challenges in those local school districts. I mean, we have counties that have school districts today that have under 1,000 students in the district. Now, structurally, that's not going to work forever. And so, are they going to have to share services? Are there going to have to be larger co-ops of many different things across county lines? I don't know, but I will tell you this, that we've got to maintain focus on our public education system in Kentucky, particularly in our K through 12. Our higher ed folks are raising money just like private universities and schools now, out everywhere. But I think that's why I think one of the biggest issues in this session will be funding K-12 education.
John, in fact, I want to back up a comment that John Cooper made. It's sort of a humorous story, actually, to me, but how important the bankers are to the process. And then I've got a question for Dan. But I remember when we were working on our tax bill a few years ago, and we truly needed every single banker in the state to touch their legislator. Absolutely had to have you touch your legislator, and it was working. And it did work in the end. But we had one banker called one day and said, I've been to his office, I've been, to his church, everywhere, I've left messages, I've called him, he won't answer my phone calls, I can't find him in his office, he didn't come to church Sunday, and John said, well, do you know where he lives? And the guy said, well, yeah, I know where he lives. He said, then go park in his driveway and wait till he comes home tonight. He said, sooner or later, he's got to come home. And sure enough, the banker goes to the driveway towards the end of the day and just parks his car in the guy's driveway. And he pulls in, he got out, and they talked about the bill, and it worked. So it's absolutely, there's a way for every one of you to get to your legislators. But Dan, let me get back with you for just a second. You heard Congressman Barr talking about the SAFER Act now, which I guess they added an R to the SAFE. But it's this. He was saying that if they tried to attach the Durbin Amendment to that he thought his Republican counterparts would vote to kill the SAFE Act, which might be blasphemy here in Colorado, but still. Do you think there's support for that in the industry to do that?
I would hope so, and I know that Congressman Luetkemeyer has told us he's not a big fan of actually the way it's worded right now for the SAFE Act, because it's a Band-Aid. It doesn't actually, and yes, I'm supposed to be here saying how great it is, but there's still problems with it. The good news, I guess, is, and this kind of deviates a little bit from your comment, but it's literally being heard in the Senate Wednesday, in 2 days. That's not happened before. So we are making some progress. And I have to say, from Missouri, who we now are both medical and recreational, we have a very large marijuana grow facility right outside of Jonesburg. I pass it every day. I think I've run over a skunk every time I've passes it. But, you know, we are dealing with, we've had to turn them away. No, we can't bank you. People that have done business there, no, we can't bank you. So there is still that need for SAFE, but I applaud him for saying, Ballard, that I will not vote for the SAFE Act if the credit card bill is attached to it, the amendment.
How big a breath do you take when you drive by?
I hold my breath.
Yeah. You've talked about the various meetings you've been to during your term as chairman. You bring a national perspective, more so than just being a member of the ABA. You've been around the nation. What sort of learning experience has been for you in regards to banking in their communities at the national level?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. You know, it's been a blessing. Diana has actually traveled with me every single place we've gone, and it's been like 40 places this year. Not 40 conventions, but we've been around the nation. And we were in Anchorage with the Alaska bankers. I think there were 7 banks in the state of Alaska. But we've visited with good folks like you, and I've already met a bunch of you. Got to play golf with Sean yesterday and Paul. That was fantastic to get to spend some quality time. And we listen to your issues. We listen to what's happening in your state house, and it's the same thing. They're a little bit different. I mean, yeah, we're all similar on the national stage, but every state maybe is a little bit different. But bankers are passionate. I wish I could bottle up the passion that you have as bankers in your states, roll that all together and unleash that to Congress to let them actually see, especially maybe the left a little bit more. A lot of our folks, good folks like Andy Barr, they know what it's like in a bank. They know what we do for our communities.
Well, John Cooper was talking about the importance of bankers contacting their legislatures. I don't think you all realize what outsized influence the local bank has on the local state rep, the local state senator, and your member of the House. I mean, it's important that bankers be involved.
That's exactly right. Music to my ears is when a legislator or even someone in Congress comes out of their office and said, "Good God, would you have them quit calling me?" I mean, to me, that's music to our ears, and that involvement is so important, particularly with all the mixed messages we're getting today. And you know, it's never been more important to get our point across. And bankers are respected in their communities by and large, and you know, I've seen, you talk about moving mountains, I've seen bankers move mountains in communities. When there's a disaster, when there's personal tragedy, when even down to the little sports team that couldn't find a sponsor, who's the person that's always the safety net? It's the banker in town.
John, you were talking about this being a budget year and the criticality of that session in Kentucky, not just probably more so this year than most years, but any year, the budget is really, it shows the values of a state, the values of a legislature, the values of a governor that proposes it. What sort of challenges are we as Kentuckians looking at short term this year and even longer term in terms of our revenue stream and our budget?
That's a really good question. And one of the inherent problems Kentucky has, we have 120 counties. That's the reality of it. I mean, that's not going to change. But it's presenting some challenges going forward in the near future. Counties and local school districts and cities just came off an infusion of money from the federal government that ends at the end of 24. That's going to create a hardship day one in itself. I already know some local judges that I've talked to that said, I don't know exactly how we're going to make our budgets. There's two focuses the General Assembly have besides education, in my opinion. One is workforce training. I mentioned that we have the second worst workforce participation rate in the country. The governor and the General Assembly of different parties are determined and hell-bent on fixing that. And I do believe that they want to do it. There's another problem Kentucky has, and it's not glamorous. It's not something that people love to talk about. We have a jail problem in Kentucky. Our jails are black holes in our counties. And county budgets, they're increasing the amount of money they have to spend in jails by sometimes as much as 60% a year. And, you know, people are going to jail to get health care. And that is something that the General Assembly is attempting to tackle right now, and they've got to tackle it, and they've got to tackle it fast. And other than that, I do believe that we've got infrastructure issues in Kentucky like every state does. I do believe that we're making, for the amount of ability we have, we're making great strides in infrastructure action.
John, how long do you think it will take to modernize our Kentucky banking statutes?
We can't do it just all in one session. That's a good question. Ballard and I have talked about this many times. We'll get a good start this session, but we won't get done. I think it'll take 3 sessions, so probably at least 3 years to get to where we're going. And invariably, somebody will come up with a problem out of left field. It won't be a banker. It'll be somebody that's been told something by some organization that throws out misinformation, and we'll have to deal with that. But I think we can get it done in 3 years. You know, it runs kind of hand in hand with the modernization of state government. You know, they're working to take state government to the cloud and also to increase efficiencies in state government. I think we'll get the banking done much quicker than we'll fix state government, though. I think 3 years would be a reasonable.
Do we still
Dan,
have an acting commissioner in DFI?
Yes.
See any permanent appointment?
Well, not until you're this close to a gubernatorial general election. That'll never get solved until it will get solved as soon as the general election's over, one way or the other.
Dan, one of the things that I was extremely happy about, matter of fact, I know we got our emerging leaders out here. Would you all stand up if you're an emerging leader, please?
Great.
Please give them a round of applause. Thank you. Appreciate it. But one of the things that I was so happy to see this year was we had our emerging leaders with us on our Washington visit. And they got to see firsthand how bureaucratic, I think, and how nonsensical Washington can be, and what amount of work and what amount of effort and what has to go into any kind of change that you're going to affect in Washington. And I know the ABA, we're constantly looking with the ABA and the list of priorities because of the bureaucracies is getting longer and longer and longer and longer. And it's getting to the point where, you know, it's 2 or 3 pages of priorities. How does the ABA focus on what are the most important issues to them as we go into each session?
Sure. Great question, Ballard. And I had the great privilege and honor to serve on the Government Relations Council. I was on first the Community Bankers Council, which is fantastic, that meets several times a year. And we come up with ideas that then gets passed on to government relations. But as I served on the Government Relations Council, I served 3 years and I became vice chair and chair. That's how I got on the board of directors that then led to me going through the chairs of the officers, which was fantastic. But we have what's called the blueprint for success. And we put hours and hours and hours into that, vetting the topics, talking with bankers nationwide, and coming up what is most important to you. And there's always somebody, unfortunately, who says, but this was really important to me. I'm sorry, but it didn't make the top list. As you said, we want it to be, I think it used to be a single fold, and then it was a tri-fold, and now it's a quadruple fold that, you know, is a piece that we can leave behind in our congressional visits. But there's a lot of work, and it's from banker input. It's from bankers of all levels, not just the CEOs. It's from the emerging leaders. What are you seeing boots on the ground, behind the scenes. What are you seeing that's harming your customer? As I said in my remarks, when you see customers struggling because of unfair regulations that stops them and we can't get money to them fast enough because some of these things, that's a priority. What is harming our customers? We want to say, it's hurting us as a bank, and we all know, I hope every banker knows, that's not the message we take into their office. The harm it's causing Jonesburg State Bank. It's the harm that it's causing our customer. It's the harm that's causing my meat processor customer, my farmer, my grocery store person, what's happening with them.
You can't beat the anecdotal stories when you go talk to your congressman. You just can't beat them.
Right, yeah.
Dan, as chairman of the ABA, what led you to be so involved in banking advocacy on the national stage? What's your advice to young bankers about how to get involved?
Well, that's perfect. Emerging leaders. I hope you can tell I'm a little passionate about banking. I'm a little passionate about supporting our industry. I'm passionate about fighting back. It actually started way back. I actually was 17 years old when I started in banking. I was a farm boy from a little town, Cairo, Missouri, north central Missouri. My dad's side of the family were farmers. That's the side that came from Jessamine, Kentucky. Probably farmed a little in Jessamine, I would assume, before they got on the covered wagon and went to Missouri. The other side, railroad workers. I had no family in banking. I had no family in any kind of white-collar industry. And when I got that job as 17, actually as the maintenance man, I went to the job service agency and they had a place for me, or they had an opening for a temporary maintenance person. And within a couple of months, they said, would you like to try to be a teller? I'm like, yes, I'd love to try to be a teller, handle the money. And so then from there, my dad was so proud that his son was in a bank, and that passion started. Diane and I got married. We moved to Kansas City. We went to UMKC, following her with her Conservatory of Music adventure, and I was a teller at a bank in Kansas City, and it just went on. And 38 years later, I'm still doing it and still as passionate, because in my late 20s, Missouri has, and I'll take it back to the state level as well, Missouri has a program called Target Bankers. And we actually sign up, and during the session, a couple days a week, groups come from all over Missouri. They brief them in Jeff City at the MBA office, and then we take a whole bunch of people over and divide and conquer and go to all the different offices. I did that in my late 20s, and I also reference in my remarks about give them your cell phone. I don't think I had a cell phone back then, but I gave them my home phone number, and I was hooked when I remember this day like it was yesterday, Senator Frank Barnett's, a Democrat from rural Missouri, called me at home and said, Dan, you've come and seen me several times. This is a banking issue. I'd like your input on this. And I'm like, wow, I'm in my 20s and a senator from Missouri is calling me, asking me about that. I sat and learned a lot more at the state level that led to me eventually becoming chairman of our state association, and more things on the national level with ABA. And my passion just got bigger and bigger. And when we see idiots like Rohit Chopra, no disrespect well,
That's okay.
it is disrespect.
Yeah. If you want to, I'll help
I
you.
just spoke in Iowa, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, he's the devil's spawn. That might be a little harsh, but all of this that's happening with CFPB is pretty bad.
Something we've all seen over the last 20, 30 years is the really big banks get bigger. The JP Morgan, Chase, Wells, B of A, they obviously have their own lobbyists in Washington. How can the folks in this room best have influence in what happens in D.C.?
That's a great comment as well. And with the American Bankers Association, we serve from the very smallest of banks to the largest of banks. Yes, they have that, but they are also members of ABA and get that benefit as well. It starts with your state association. Ballard takes a group every single year. How many did you have this year, Ballard?
With close to 50 this
Close
year.
to
I
50.
think.
50 people.
50 people, yeah.
How many are in this room?
Several of them went.
More
All
than
the young
50.
bankers were there, so they're not raising their hands, but they're
Well, I'm saying how many are in this room?
300.
That went to Washington?
You guys all need to be going to D.C.
Yeah.
We should be chartering planes. We should be taking buses. We should be calling ahead and saying, Representative Barr, would you reserve a committee room for us? Because we can't fit around your table in the office. We need to talk down the way in a committee room where we're going to fill that thing up. Exactly what we're all saying. It is the voice of all of us. It starts in Frankfurt with your visits there, and I would assume you all do similar things. You bring a lot of bankers to the state capitol and you push back, and it takes our individual voices. A lobbyist, yes, they work very hard for us and they do a very good job, but they want to hear from you. They want to hear what's happening in Bowling Green, Kentucky. They want to hear what's happening in Paducah. They don't necessarily want to hear from the lobbyists. So we've got to raise our voice. I mean, that's it, is we've got to, and all the little, the SecureAmericanOpportunity.com, the Kansas Bank, or Kentucky Bankers, I know on your site you have the opportunity as well to do the letters, to do the emails.
Yeah.
Just like you said, they come out and they say, all right, back off the dogs, you know. They hear it, and so we've got to just keep our voices up.
John, Frankfurt this year, give me 1, 2, 3 priorities for bankers.
Well, first off, 70% of the House of Representatives in Frankfurt's been there 4 years or less. We've got a lot of folks that don't know their own legislators, okay? We got to learn our folks first. We have a very inexperienced legislature, both in the House and in the Senate. So a priority for us is to make sure, because to get the legislation passed to revamp our state laws and regulations, that means they've got to understand it. I can tell when I call a banker and they don't know their legislator. There's a moment of silence on the phone that goes on. But we're pretty good in this state about, you give us a little time, we'll get to know them. The things that are going to be important to us are going to be rewriting and modernizing the statutes. And bad legislation takes up 50% of our time. We've got to rewrite or to tweak this modernization of the clerk's offices, and we will have several pieces of legislation along the filing and all the UCC stuff. So we'll have that'll be big. But we also work with other trade associations on those big issues that affect, like workforce and things like that. We work on that.
Well, I remember there's several people interested in the Uniform Electronic Mortgage Recording Act,
Absolutely.
which obviously we're still trying to get implemented.
We're still working on that, and you know, some people just resist that kind of change. When you won't read your own emails at the office, it's hard to see the significance of that, and we still have some that don't.
Dan, in D.C., we've heard Representative Barr talk to us this morning. You were here for that. We obviously want to rein in CFPB. Give me 1, 2, 3 on legislation that we should be telling our representatives and our senators we want.
Well, we've said it several times. I think right now the Credit Card Competition Act, it affects us, and it will affect us. And we've got the power. They're not happy because there are at least 4 senators and half a dozen representatives that are holding it up and not letting it go forward, and we've got to continue to keep that pressure on. So certainly that as well. ACRE, I'll say for you in Kentucky and for me in Missouri, it affects Jonesburg. It affects Montgomery County, Warren County, right where I am. And I have CFPB that pushes back for that. So certainly ACRE is very important as well. And I mean, it's what we've talked about, the pushback of CFPB, the pushback against the regulators. And I guess one last thing is fair access that continues. Again, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, a bunch of them keep pushing the Fed to enforce things against fair access. We as bankers don't need to be a political football. And it's coming, sadly, from both sides. It's coming from the Republican Party saying we're going to pass legislation, and I would assume it's happened in the state.
Absolutely. One of the things that we really push hard is we don't want to be the person that has the hammer on everything that goes on. And unfortunately, it's easy because of the bank's contacts with everyone to say, well, you make everybody do this, or you be the hammer, you be the hammer. We don't want to do that. We want to bank. We want to bank our customers.
As you all are very, very competent bankers, and I know you run successful banks, and you should be able to say, this is not for me. We don't have the expertise, we don't have the staff, This is not something that we want to or should be banking. But also, if it's something, if we want to bank the marijuana grow facility outside of town, we should be able to say, we should be able to bank them. We know what it's about, whatever it is. And I hate to bring that into the weeds, so to speak. But we should be able, as bankers, to be bankers and actually not have fair access, have that crammed down our throats. So that's really important as well.
Ballard, you want to wrap this up?
Well, I want to thank Dan because I know that the ABA has weekly phone calls when we need them among all the state association execs, and when the issues are hot, I know that goes to 2 times a week and sometimes 3 times a week. And so we appreciate the ABA. And to John, I can't say enough about John Cooper. He's been with us. I think the first place I turned around and looked was to find a John, and I found a John. And he's been with us for, 38 years, 39 years, whatever it is, and we could not be where we are without him. And I appreciate both of you all, appreciate your efforts. And I know both of you love banking, and that works for me.
Yeah. So, well, if I could say, Ballard is a legend in D.C. on the national stage. And it's
Is that good or bad?
It plays both ways.
He's been known to speak his mind, but that's a good thing. And when I've had the pleasure of being at events where there's multiple different state execs there, it's really fun to see those that, especially the junior state execs, are like, what's Ballard saying? What's going on over there? Yeah. And that's great. And we just had a legend retire, Max Cook. I know Ballard's very good friends with him. And we're very blessed to have Jackson Hadaway follow in his footsteps, and I know he will continue on. But I just want to say we should give Ballard a round of applause.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks.
John, Dan, thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
Your insights on government relations, and particularly telling us how important everybody in this audience is to the agenda that you all present in Frankfort and D.C. Thank you, gentlemen.